March 17, 1952, 2:23 a.m. The shovel struck frozen dirt with a dull, echoing crack that carried across the empty lot on 143rd Street. Again and again it hit, each blow harder than the last. 3 men stood in a rough circle, shoulders slumped, hands raw and bleeding through thin gloves, breath bursting from their mouths in desperate white clouds. The cold sliced into their lungs, but fear cut deeper. They were digging because they had been told to dig, and because standing just feet away, watching every swing in complete silence, was Bumpy Johnson. He didn't shout. He didn't rush them. He simply observed, his coat collar turned up, his eyes steady, his presence heavy enough to crush the night itself. After a long moment, Bumpy finally spoke. "Deeper," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. That softness was worse than rage. $75,000. That was how much the Genovese family had paid these 3 men to walk into Harlem and tell Bumpy Johnson the cruelest lie of his life, that his brother Willie was dead. Murdered in a Chicago alley. Beaten, dumped into Lake Michigan, erased forever. For 6 months, Bumpy believed it. For 6 months, he mourned a brother he thought he would never see again. For 6 months, he stood beside an empty grave and swallowed a grief so heavy it bent even him. And for 6 months, he quietly planned a war against the wrong people. That's the thing about lies, they don't disappear. They wait. They rot. And eventually, they come back carrying interest. When Bumpy Johnson finally discovered the truth, when he learned his brother wasn't dead at all but alive, hidden in a basement in Newark and used as leverage against him, something changed behind his eyes. The men kept digging, their shoulders aching, hands blistered, minds racing. They didn't know if they were digging for bodies or digging their own graves. Bumpy lit a cigarette, took a slow drag, and watched the smoke vanish into the darkness. "You told me my brother was dead," he said quietly. "You made me cry at an empty funeral. You made my mother collapse in church. And you did it for money." What nobody knew, what history books never tell you, was that Bumpy Johnson had learned the truth 3 weeks earlier. And what he did in those 3 weeks didn't just save his brother's life. It dismantled an entire conspiracy stretching from Harlem to Chicago to the highest levels of the Italian mob. Deals were broken. Alliances collapsed. Men who thought themselves untouchable suddenly weren't. And the rules of loyalty in the underworld were about to be rewritten in blood. To understand why that night on 143rd Street mattered, you have to understand who Bumpy Johnson was in 1952, and why his brother Willie meant more to him than Harlem itself. By then, Bumpy wasn't just a gangster. He was Harlem. Every numbers runner, every club owner, every politician who wanted black votes knew his name. He had survived the wars with Dutch Schultz in the 1930s. He had forged uneasy alliances with the Italian mob that allowed Harlem to keep its independence. He was the man who protected his people when no one else would. But there was one person who mattered more than power, money, or territory. His older brother Willie. Most people don't know this part of the story. When Bumpy was just 10 years old in Charleston, South Carolina, a white man began harassing their mother, saying things no man should ever say. Willie confronted him. Words turned physical. The white man ended up dead. In 1915 South Carolina, that was a death sentence. Lynch mobs were forming before the body was cold. Bumpy's parents mortgaged everything they owned, their tiny house, their future, to get Willie out of town before the mob could find him. Bumpy never forgot that night. He watched his brother climb into the back of a wagon, too young to understand if he would ever see him again. Willie didn't wave. He just nodded, a silent promise. For years later, Bumpy followed him north to New York. Willie had settled in Harlem, working honest jobs, keeping his head down. He wasn't built for street life. He was quiet, thoughtful, the kind of man who read books and avoided conflict. Everything Bumpy wasn't. But none of that mattered. Willie was blood. For 30 years, Bumpy kept his promise. Willie lived in a brownstone on 127th Street with his wife and kids, working as a bookkeeper for a black-owned insurance company. He never touched street money. Never spoke on business. And Bumpy made sure everyone knew Willie was off limits. You didn't look at Willie Johnson wrong. You didn't speak his name casually. You didn't threaten him. The Italian mob understood that, at least they used to. When Bumpy cut deals with Lucky Luciano's people in the 1930s, one condition was non-negotiable: his family stays untouched. Luciano agreed. He understood blood. But by 1952, Luciano was gone, deported to Italy. The old rules were fading. A new generation was rising, men who didn't know the history, didn't respect the codes, and didn't fear what came with breaking them. Men like Vito Genovese. And that's when they made the biggest mistake of their lives. Genovese wanted Harlem. Not a piece of it. Not a percentage. All of it: the numbers, the clubs, the policy banks, the back rooms, the money that flowed through the streets like blood. And as long as Bumpy Johnson was standing, that was never going to happen. Genovese tried the usual methods first. He sent enforcers north. Bumpy sent them back with broken legs and clear messages carved into their pride. He tried bribing Bumpy's people. Bumpy found out and made examples so public no one forgot them. He tried leaning on the police. Bumpy already owned better connections. Every door Genovese pushed on slammed shut in his face. So finally, he decided to stop attacking Harlem and start attacking the man who held it together. This wouldn't be a war of bullets. It would be a war of the mind. Genovese understood something most men didn't: power doesn't always collapse from force. Sometimes it collapses from grief. Find the weakness. Exploit it. Destroy the man from the inside. And Bumpy Johnson's weakness wasn't hard to find. His brother Willie. September 1951, 6 months before that frozen night on 143rd Street, in a private back room of a Little Italy restaurant, Vito Genovese sat at the head of the table, twirling pasta on his fork like he was bored. Around him were three of his most trusted men: Tony Bianchi, the messenger who knew every street; Sal Ferraro, muscle with no conscience; and Dominic, the actor; Russo, a man famous for making people believe things that never happened. "We've tried everything," Genovese said, stabbing his fork down hard. "Force doesn't work. Money doesn't work. This Bumpy Johnson, he's got Harlem locked tight. So we need a different approach." "What kind of approach?" Tony asked. Genovese smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't friendly. "We don't attack what he owns," he said. "We attack what he loves." Dominic leaned forward. "The brother," he said calmly. "Willie. I've been watching him for months. Clean. Regular job. Wife. Kids. No street ties. But Bumpy would burn Manhattan to ash for this man. So we take him?" Sal asked. "No," Genovese said, shaking his head. "We do something smarter. We make Bumpy think he's dead. We give him a body. Witnesses. Paperwork. We let him mourn. We let grief hollow him out. And while he's weak, while he's distracted, we take Harlem piece by piece." He paused, then added, "And the brother stays alive. Insurance. If Bumpy ever figures it out, we squeeze Harlem, or his brother dies for real." The plan was in motion within a week. On October 3, 1951, 3 men grabbed Willie Johnson as he walked home from work. No drama. No noise. They shoved him into a car, drove him to a warehouse outside the city, and locked him in a basement room with concrete walls and a single bare bulb. Willie didn't fight. He wasn't built that way. He asked only one question. "Does my brother know?" "Your brother thinks you're dead," Tony told him flatly. And he's going to keep thinking that until we say otherwise. The fake murder was staged perfectly. A body was dumped in a Chicago alley, face smashed beyond recognition, dressed in Willie's clothes, carrying Willie's wallet. Witnesses were paid. Police reports were filed. Cops already on Genovese's payroll stamped it clean. Case closed. 2 days later, Bumpy Johnson got the call. "Mr. Johnson," the voice said, "I'm sorry to inform you. Your brother Willie was found dead in Chicago. Murdered. The body has been identified." The phone slipped from Bumpy's hand. For the first time in his adult life, Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson cried. The funeral was held on October 15th. An empty casket. His mother Margaret, now in her 70s, collapsed in the church and had to be carried out. Bumpy stood at the front, face carved from stone, but everyone who knew him could see it. Something inside him had fractured. And miles away, in that same private room in Little Italy, Vito Genovese raised a glass. "To weakness," he said softly. "Even the strongest men have it." For 6 months, Bumpy was not the same. He moved slower. Spoke less. The fire that once burned behind his eyes flickered. His lieutenants noticed. His enemies noticed. And Genovese people began creeping into Harlem, taking corners that had been untouchable for decades, testing boundaries, waiting for the moment Harlem finally fell. What they didn't know was that grief hadn't killed Bumpy Johnson. It had sharpened him. But here's what Genovese never understood about Bumpy Johnson. Grief didn't make him weak. It made him observant. It slowed him down in a way that sharpened his focus. It turned him into a man who watched everything, remembered everything, and waited. Bumpy moved through Harlem like a ghost, quiet, measured, eyes always working. And slowly, patterns began to emerge. Small things at first. A new bookie on 135th Street who didn't show the right kind of fear around Bumpy's people. A club owner who suddenly had Italian money behind him. Conversations that died the moment Bumpy stepped into the room. Harlem was shifting, and Bumpy could feel it under his feet. Then in February of 1952, he noticed something he couldn't ignore. He was eating dinner at Wells' restaurant when he saw a familiar face past the window, Dominic, the actor, Russo. A Genovese man. A liar by trade. A man with no business walking casually down 132nd Street like he belonged there. Bumpy didn't react. He didn't look twice. He finished his meal and sent word to his most trusted man, Illinois Gordon. "Follow him." Illinois tailed Russo for 3 days. Same routes. Same meetings. Same faces. Careful, controlled, professional. Until the 3rd day, when Russo made a mistake. He stopped at a pay phone on 128th Street and made a call. Illinois couldn't hear the words, but he watched Russo's face change. He watched him smile. Then laugh. And Illinois felt a chill run straight through his spine. Dominic Russo didn't laugh unless a con had worked. That night, Illinois reported back. "He's laughing," he said. "Like he pulled something big. Like he's proud of himself." Bumpy sat in silence, eyes fixed on nothing, the gears turning. After a long moment, he spoke 5 words that changed everything. "Find out why he's laughing." It took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of shadows and whispers. 2 weeks of buying drinks, listening too closely, asking questions nobody thought mattered. And finally, the answer came from a janitor in Newark. A man who cleaned a warehouse basement. A basement where a black man had been held for 6 months. A man who matched Willie Johnson's description exactly. "He's alive," Illinois said, barely able to breathe. "Willie's alive. They've had him this whole time." Bumpy didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't blink. Then slowly, something returned to his eyes. That old fire. That cold, patient flame that had made him king of Harlem. Get me Tony Bianchi, Bumpy said quietly. Get me Sal Ferraro. Get me Dominic Russo. I don't care how. I don't care what it costs. Get them. Illinois hesitated. And then what? Bumpy stood, straightened his tie, and looked him dead in the eye. Then they're going to dig. For the next 3 weeks, Bumpy played his role perfectly. The grieving brother. The weakened king. He made no sudden moves. He let Genovese people think they were winning. But behind the scenes, he was building something precise. He learned everything about the Newark warehouse, guards, shifts, habits, blind spots. He mapped Tony, Sal, and Dominic's lives down to the minute. Where they slept. Where they drank. Who they trusted. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was sloppy. On March 15, 1952, at 3 a.m., Bumpy made his move. A team of his best men hit the Newark warehouse. 6 guards. Neutralized without a single shot fired. And in the basement room, sitting on a cot beneath a flickering bulb, reading a worn Bible, was Willie Johnson. "Hey, little brother," Willie said softly. Bumpy didn't answer. He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around him. For the first time in 6 months, the weight lifted. But the debt was still unpaid. March 17, 1952. 2:23 a.m. An empty lot on 143rd Street. Tony Bianchi, Sal Ferraro, and Dominic Russo stood in a line, hands tied, surrounded by 12 of Bumpy's most loyal men. They had been taken from their beds hours earlier. No warnings. No calls. In front of them lay 3 shovels. Behind the shovels stood Bumpy Johnson, calm as Sunday morning. "Dig," he said. "Bumpy, listen," Tony's voice cracked. "This was Genovese's idea. We were just following orders. You know how it works." Bumpy didn't raise his voice. "I said dig." The men looked at each other, then picked up the shovels. For 2 hours they dug. Frozen ground. Blistered hands. Backs screaming. Every time they slowed, Bumpy repeated the same word. Deeper. By 4 a.m., 3 graves stood open. 6 feet each. The men collapsed at the edges, shaking, dirt-caked, broken. Bumpy stepped to the first hole and looked down at Tony Bianchi. "You called my house," he said quietly. "You told me my brother was dead. You heard me cry." Tony nodded, sobbing. "Do you remember what you said after you hung up?" Tony shook his head. Bumpy pulled a slip of paper from his pocket. "My people heard you. They wrote it down. You said, that was easy. That's what my brother's life was worth to you." He turned to Dominic Russo. "You staged it all. The body. The witnesses. The paperwork. They call you the actor, right? Because you make people believe lies." Dominic stared at the ground. Bumpy grabbed his chin and forced his eyes up. "Look at me." His voice dropped. "You made my mother collapse in church. A 70-year-old woman who never hurt anyone." And for the first time that night, Bumpy Johnson raised his voice. "You made her think her son was dead for money." Bumpy's voice was low now, controlled. Then he turned to Sal Ferraro. "And you," he said. "You were the muscle. You grabbed Willie off the street. You kept him locked in that basement for 6 months." Bumpy paused. "Did he ever ask about me?" Sal swallowed and nodded slowly. "Every day," he said. "Every single day. He kept asking if you were okay." Something flickered across Bumpy's face, just for a heartbeat. Pain. Raw and human. Then it vanished, replaced by steel. "Here's what's going to happen," Bumpy said, stepping back so all 3 men could see him clearly. "You're not going to die tonight. I know that's what you expected. I know that's what you think you deserve. But killing you would be too easy. And nothing about what you did to my family was easy. He reached into his jacket and pulled out 3 envelopes, dropping one into each open grave. Inside each envelope is a one-way bus ticket. Tony, you're going to Mississippi. Sal, you're going to Alabama. Dominic, you're going to Georgia. Bumpy, let the words sink in. You're going to live out the rest of your lives in the deep South. No connections. No protection. No Italian mob to hide behind. Just 3 white men with New York accents in places where people don't ask questions when strangers disappear. The men stared at him, stunned. If I ever hear your names again, Bumpy continued, if I ever hear you came back north, if I ever hear you contacted Genovese or anyone connected to him, the next graves you dig will be the ones you stay in. Do you understand? They nodded frantically. Say it. We understand, they said together. Good. Now get out of my city, Bumpy said. He leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. And when you're sitting in some backwater town wondering how your lives fell apart, remember this, Willie Johnson is alive. He's sitting in my mother's house right now, eating her cooking, playing with his kids. And you? Bumpy straightened. You're dead to everyone who ever knew you. The difference between you and my brother is simple. He got to come home. You don't. Then Bumpy Johnson turned and walked away. His men stayed behind to make sure the tickets were taken and the 3 men vanished into the night. By morning, every hustler from Boston to Baltimore had heard the story. Bumpy Johnson's brother had been kidnapped. Bumpy had been lied to for 6 months. And when he learned the truth, he didn't start a war. He didn't leave bodies in the street. He did something far worse. He made 3 made men dig their own graves, and then exiled them to places where their names meant nothing and their lives slowly disappeared. The message was unmistakable. You could try to hurt Bumpy Johnson. You could lie to him. You could even think you'd beaten him. But he would find out. He always found out. And when he did, the punishment wouldn't be quick. It would be complete. You would have to live with it. Vito Genovese called an emergency meeting the next day. His face was red with rage, but beneath it was something new, fear. He took 3 of my men, Genovese said. Made them disappear. No bodies. No war. How am I supposed to answer that? No one at the table had a response. Because the truth was, they were impressed. They had all used violence to solve problems. Killings. Beatdowns. Blood. But Bumpy had done something smarter. He had turned their own plan against them, rescued his brother, punished the conspirators, and left Genovese with no excuse to retaliate. It was chess. And Bumpy had just declared checkmate. Willie Johnson moved back into his brownstone on 127th Street. He returned to work at the insurance company. He never spoke about the 6 months in the basement. But every Sunday, without fail, he went to Bumpy's house for dinner. The 2 brothers sat on the porch, drinking coffee, watching the neighborhood pass by. They never talked about what happened. They didn't need to. Blood had held. Tony Bianchi was last seen working at a gas station in Biloxi, Mississippi. Sal Ferraro faded into a small town outside Montgomery, Alabama. And Dominic, the actor, Russo, the man who sold Bumpy Johnson the worst lie of his life, died alone in a Savannah rooming house in 1967. No funeral. No obituary. No one to mourn him. Some lies don't kill you fast. They kill you slowly. That night, Bumpy Johnson proved something most people miss. The most powerful revenge isn't the one that ends quickly. It's the one that lasts forever. Death ends punishment. Exile makes it eternal. Power isn't about how many people you kill. It's about how many people fear you without you ever pulling a trigger. And more than anything, Bumpy proved that some bonds can't be broken. Not by lies. Not by money. Not by the most powerful mob in America. Blood holds. If this story hit you different, smash that like button and subscribe. We're bringing stories like this every week. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.